right, it's time to do it again. Update the top 25 college football ranking heading into week 14, rivalry weekend. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. I hate doing it, but you love watching it. Here it is, the updated top 25. Now, as you can see, I've made some significant changes here. I've seen almost an entire football season's worth of games here, and I'm ready to start drawing some conclusions. Before I get into the explanations here, I'm going to go through and kind of let you know my thought process on some of these rankings. Before we get to that, though, shout out to today's sponsor, Prize Picks. All right, you need to head on over to prizepicks.com. I don't know what they were thinking, but they've done messed up. Look at this. I know this is a college football channel, and most of y'all, or at least some of y'all, don't watch the NFL. But look at this. Tyreek Hill, wide receiver for the Dolphins. I think that's a Thursday game. I think that's the Thanksgiving night game, the Dolphins. Anyway, half a receiving yard. Half a receiving yard. So if you don't know how Prize Picks works, you're not picking winners or losers of games. You're picking more or less on stat lines. So in this case, with Tyreek Hill, the wide receiver for the Dolphins, you can bet, you can make a play on more than 0.5. All he's got to do is catch one pass for 1 yard. Okay, I'll take that. When it comes to Tyreek Hill, it's almost like I think they're giving away money here. So, but anyway, the way this works is you have to pick three players, and you're picking more or less on a stat line. So you're not picking winners or losers of games. So like in this case, Tyreek Hill, more than 0.5 receiving yards. You know, whatever your favorite college team is, whatever, Carson Beck or whatever, you can pick more or less on his passing yards or his touchdowns or whatever the case. Make sure when you get signed up, you use promo code Uncle Lou. That's one word, uppercase letters, no spaces, Uncle Lou. And they're going to hook you up. Make any $5 play over on Prize Picks. And whether you win or lose, they're going to give you $50 for free, courtesy of Uncle Lou. It's easy to get signed up. I live in Georgia, so there's a lot of those other sites I can't use. I can use Prize Picks in Georgia, though. So if you're in Georgia and you've been looking for a site that you can use, this is one, prizepicks.com. Make sure you check them out. Promo code Uncle Lou. All right, 1 and 2 stay the same. Oregon and Ohio State. I don't really feel like I need much explanation here. I've had Oregon number one all the way back since when they beat Ohio State in week 3 or 4 or 5, whatever that was. And Ohio State might be the best team in the country right now. They're playing like it. Unfortunately, they do have the loss to Oregon. Oregon's undefeated, so I'm leaving Oregon at 1. It was a great game when they played at Oregon. If they play again, and it looks like they will in the Big Ten championship game, that'll be a neutral site. Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship game. I have a feeling Ohio State might be favored there. It's going to be a great game. I'm not making a prediction on it, but that seems pretty obvious to me. Oregon 1, Ohio State 2. Oregon was on a bye week this past week. They play Washington coming up here in rivalry week. Ohio State, of course, has Michigan coming up. They took care of Indiana last week, a lopsided win there, 38-15. Held Indiana to about 145 total yards. Ohio State's defense has shut down everybody they have played, point blank period, since that Oregon game. That's going to be a great game when those two meet up here in a couple of weeks for the Big Ten championship. Oregon 1, Ohio State 2. I moved Georgia up to 3. Georgia's the third best team in the country. They just are. They've already beaten Texas, who everybody else tells me is the third best team. Not only did they beat them handily by 2 touchdowns. At Texas, on the road, there, in their place. Texas has 0 ranked wins. They haven't beaten anybody with a pulse. Their best win is Vandy, or maybe Arkansas. They handled Kentucky this past week, 31-14, and that's great, but they've yet to beat really anybody of significance. Georgia, on the other hand, has 3 significant wins, including one over Texas. They also have a win over top 15 Clemson. They're in the top 12. Where do I have Clemson? I've got Clemson at 13. I think the AP has Clemson at 12. Anyway, they're a top 15 team. And, of course, Georgia has the win over Tennessee, who is in everybody's top 10. So Georgia's got 3 wins better than any win Texas has, including a win over Texas. I moved Georgia all the way up to 3. They did lose to Bama on the road. They did lose to Ole Miss on the road. And those losses, honestly, don't look as good as they did at the time when they occurred. Each of those teams have now lost 3 games, and each of those teams have lost games to really teams they shouldn't have lost to. Alabama with losses to Vandy and now Oklahoma. It's just not good losses. Ole Miss losses to Florida and Kentucky, not good losses. But Georgia's got enough. Georgia's got more good wins than anybody in the country. Georgia's got 3 wins over top 15 teams. They're a really good team. The odds to win the national championship have Georgia at, I believe, 2 behind Ohio State. Ohio State 1, Georgia 2, Oregon 3. I think Georgia's really good. I moved them up to 3, 1 spot ahead of Texas. I've got Notre Dame at 5. Notre Dame's got a terrible loss. They've got the worst loss of any team in the top 25. Never mind the playoff contending teams or the top 10 or the top 12. A home loss to Northern Illinois. Their 2 best wins are against service academies, group of 5 teams, Army and Navy. No disrespect to Army and Navy, but they're not in the same universe as any of these other top 10 teams. Now, it's not Notre Dame's fault they haven't played them, but the reality is they haven't played them. Other than that, they've got to win against Georgia Tech. I think they've got to win against Louisville, which is ranked in some rankings. I don't think the AP has Louisville ranked. No, the AP does not have. I do have Louisville ranked. I think Louisville's a pretty good team. The AP does not have Louisville ranked, but I'll give Notre Dame some credit for a decent win against Louisville, decent win against Georgia Tech. But you're talking about 4 and 5 lost teams there. I think Notre Dame's a good team. I think they're going to get into the playoffs if they can beat Southern Cal this coming week. They play Southern Cal on the road this coming week. If they beat Southern Cal, they'll be 11-1. Not only will they get into the playoffs, they're going to have a 5 through 8 seed, which means they'll host a home playoff game. Georgia beat an elementary school this past weekend, and they played Georgia Tech Friday, rivalry week in Athens. Georgia's about a 20-point favorite in that one. And Georgia, of course, has clinched a spot in the SEC championship game, which is another reason I moved them up. Texas at 4, talked about them already. They beat Kentucky this coming week. They have the huge game with Texas A&M this weekend. They play on the road in College Station. We haven't seen this game in about 50. I'm so excited for this game, I can't stand it. This Texas A&M game. One of the most bitter rivalries in all of college football that got taken away from us as fans through no fault of our own. Texas A&M leaves, joins the SEC. Texas and Texas A&M get mad at each other. They can't agree on a non-conference date or time to play or place to play or whatever, and so they just throw their hands up and say, screw it, we're not going to play anymore. So we haven't seen this game in 15 years. Now we finally get it back. I've been excited about this game since it was announced. I had no idea when it was announced that this game would be for a trip to the SEC championship game, but that's what's on the line here. The winner of this Texas A&M game will face Georgia in Atlanta for the SEC championship. And in the case of Texas A&M, that's their only possibility of getting into the playoffs. If Texas A&M wants to get in the playoffs, they've got to not only beat Texas this weekend, they then would have to beat Georgia in the SEC championship game and earn an automatic bid. With 3 losses, including an embarrassing loss this past week on the road at Auburn, they're not getting into the playoffs without an automatic bid, in my opinion, Texas A&M. Texas, on the other hand, is a little more up in the air. Now, I'm of the opinion that if Texas loses this week to Texas A&M, they should fall all the way out of the playoffs. Now, keep in mind, I thought the same thing about Indiana, but because so many other teams lost at the same time that Indiana lost to Ohio State, Indiana ended up not falling out of the top 12. So it's possible, I guess, Texas could lose that game to Texas A&M, but you have a bunch of other weird things happen in the top 15, and so Texas stays in the playoff hunt. But my opinion on Texas, like I said, they've played one ranked team, and they got blown out at home by Georgia. Other than that, they don't have any ranked wins. They've got to win against Michigan, and it's not Texas' fault, but Michigan is terrible. Other than that, Vandy and Arkansas, maybe Kentucky, are the best wins that they have. Just through scheduling luck, they avoided, sort of the top 5 or 6 teams in the SEC this season, with the exception of Georgia, which they lost. But they avoided Bama, Ole Miss, Tennessee. They didn't play any of those teams. So I think they need to beat Texas A&M to earn sort of a quality win there. If they beat Texas A&M and get into the SEC championship game with Georgia, then I think they're probably in the playoffs, win or lose, in that SEC championship game. But we'll see. I've got them at 4. Notre Dame at 5. Like I mentioned, they beat up on another group of 5 school this past weekend, and they want credit for it. I'm not giving you any credit for it. You beat Army and you beat Navy. You've lost to Northern Illinois. Your best wins are Louisville and Georgia Tech. This weekend, you're playing Southern Cal. They're not any good either. You're getting in the playoffs, so that ought to be enough for you. Penn State at 6. Close win on the road against Minnesota. I'm not really punishing Penn State here. I had them at 5, I think, last week. Moved them down to 6, but that's only because I moved Georgia up. Georgia's just better than Penn State. I'm a Georgia fan. You can hold that against me if you want. You can call me an SEC homer. You can do whatever you punch the air if that makes you feel better. There's not a single person watching this video that would put $1 of their own money right now on Penn State to beat Georgia. You wouldn't do it. And Georgia would be about a 10-point favorite. Georgia's just a lot better. What is Penn State's best win? Illinois. I've got Illinois ranked 21. I think they beat Illinois. When people talk about Penn State, the first thing they say is, well, they only lost to Ohio State by 7. If that's the first thing you can say about a team, I don't know. So anyway, I think Penn State's a good team. I think they're going to the playoffs. Do I think they're better than Georgia? No. I've got Georgia at 3, Penn State at 6. I've got Tennessee at 7. Now, here's where I start to give some teams credit for their record, okay? I don't think Penn State's better than Tennessee either. I don't. I think if Tennessee and Penn State played, I think it would be a low-scoring game, but I think Tennessee would win the game. It wouldn't matter to me whether it was played at Penn State, in Knoxville, neutral site. I would bet money on Tennessee to beat Penn State. However, Tennessee's best win is against Alabama, which now looks worse. They've got a pretty bad loss to Arkansas, and they got handled by Georgia in Athens a couple of weeks ago. So, to be fair, I've got them one spot behind Penn State. Tennessee beat an elementary school this past weekend 56-0. They play on the road at Vandy this coming week. Penn State, I mentioned, beat Minnesota. They play Maryland this coming week. Miami, I've got them at 8. Again, what anybody's thoughts or opinions are about Miami is almost irrelevant. They're going to the playoffs if they win this week at Syracuse and then win the ACC championship against most likely SMU. Do I think Miami is the 8th best team in the country? Probably not. I think there's probably some teams ranked behind Miami that could probably give them a game. But they only got the one loss. It's not a great loss. It's to Georgia Tech, an unranked team. I think Georgia Tech is, what is Georgia Tech? 7-4. I think Georgia Tech 7-4. Anyway, they're a decent team. But Miami lacks a signature win. They do have a win over Louisville, which is what is right now, that win is what is putting them into the ACC championship. They're actually tied with Clemson in terms of conference record. Clemson also has one conference loss, but Clemson lost to Louisville. Miami beat Louisville. So Miami right now holds the tiebreaker over Clemson. If for some reason Miami loses this weekend on the road at Syracuse, then Clemson moves into the ACC championship game and will face most likely SMU, who you can see there I've got ranked at 9th. They beat Virginia 33-7. That's a pretty good win on the road at Virginia. Virginia got beat by Notre Dame last week, but Virginia did cover the spread against Notre Dame. They did not cover against SMU. SMU looked good, 33-7 on the road at Virginia. They host Cal in their final regular season game this weekend. SMU does, before heading to the ACC championship game here in a couple of weeks. So Tennessee 7, Miami 8. Miami played Wake Forest, beat them 42-14. I thought it was one of the better games of the year for Miami. I watched a lot of that game because I had bet on it. And I thought Miami played pretty well in that game. We've seen Miami score in the 40s a lot, but we've also seen Miami give up a lot of points and yards, particularly in the second halves of games this season. And they didn't do that here. I thought it was, again, Wake Forest is not a great team, but I thought it was one of the better games of the year for Miami. I've got them at number 8. They, of course, play on the road at Syracuse this week, SMU at 9. And I've got Indiana at 10. So I had Indiana all the way up at 3. I was giving Indiana credit like everybody wanted me to. They were a Big Ten team that was undefeated, 10-0. Even though they hadn't played anybody, I was doing what everybody told me to do. I had them up at 3rd. They got absolutely destroyed by Ohio State. It was a complete and total mismatch in every phase of the game, including special teams, which really cost Indiana 14 points in that game. Ohio State had a punt return for a touchdown, and then Indiana's punter fumbled a snap on a punt, giving Ohio State basically a free touchdown there too. Indiana had 70 yards on their first drive of the game against Ohio State, and in their next 7 drives, they had 19 yards. They finished with 150 total. Ohio State just dominated them. Again, I was prepared to drop Indiana down to 15, 16, 17, something like that. But through dumb luck, I guess, for Indiana, good luck for Indiana, a bunch of teams ahead of them, of course, lost this past weekend. Alabama, Ole Miss, BYU lost. Just the list goes on and on and on. So through process of elimination, Indiana remains in my top 10. Indiana, in my opinion, remains a probable playoff team. I've got Indiana at 10. They play the worst team in the Power 4 this week. No, I'm not talking about Florida State. I'm talking about Purdue. 1-win Purdue. Indiana hosts Purdue this weekend. Indiana will finish 11-1 and will likely be in the playoffs. Only question will be, do they host a game at 11-1 or do they travel at 11-1? We'll find that out in a couple of weeks when the playoff committee releases their final rankings. But that's my top 10. Boise State I've got at 11. If they can win their next 2 games, they're going to the playoffs. They will be the highest ranked Group of 5 team. They escaped this past weekend against a bad Wyoming team. They played on the road at Wyoming. They won 17-13. Wyoming's a 2-win team. They're not good. Boise State avoids disaster there, gets the win. They host Oregon State this coming week. And Oregon State had a good win last weekend against a pretty hot Washington State team. So we'll see. But as long as Boise State can handle Oregon State and then win their conference championship game, they are going to finish as the highest ranked Group of 5 team. If they stumble and don't do that, then you're probably looking at Tulane, who you can see I've got down there at 17. We'll talk about them in a minute. But this week I've got Boise State at 11, and I've got Arizona State at 12. Arizona State, kind of like South Carolina in the SEC, is getting hot at the right time. Now, unfortunately for South Carolina, they lost 3 games early in the season, so they're sort of on the outside looking in terms of SEC championship game and playoffs or anything like that. But South Carolina's playing a lot better now than they were playing the first month of the season. And the same thing is true for Arizona State. Scatterboo went absolutely nuts this past week for them in a win against BYU. They beat BYU 28-23. They play their in-state rival game this weekend. Arizona State does on the road at Arizona. They'll be a favorite. Arizona, disappointing team this year, but weird things happen in rivalry games. But Arizona State is still alive. They need to win to get themselves into the Big 12 title game. And of course, if they win that, they'll be in the playoffs as the representative from the Big 12. I've got them as the highest ranked Big 12 team right now. I've got Clemson at 13. I still think Clemson's a really good team. In fact, they're probably one of the best 12 teams in the country. The loss to Louisville really hurt them. They not only they lose, they looked pretty bad in that game. Now, they got blown out by Georgia, but that was way back in week 1. And you can kind of look past that now at this point in the season. It's the Louisville game really that is I think giving people some hesitation when it comes to Clemson. And again, because of the tiebreaker, right now they're on the outside looking in terms of the ACC championship game. Now, it's possible because of how highly ranked they are. Again, they're 12th in the AP. I've got them 13th. We'll see what the playoff committee has them tomorrow. It's possible Clemson finds a way into the playoffs without even playing for the ACC championship, although you would need basically another weekend like we had this past weekend. In other words, you would need maybe Indiana to lose to Purdue, Tennessee to lose to Vandy. Obviously Miami losing to Syracuse would be the ideal one because then Clemson would get into the ACC championship game, in which case they could earn their way in by beating SMU in that ACC championship game. But even without that happening, there are some possibilities. Notre Dame losing to Southern Cal. These aren't things that are likely. I mean, all of those teams are favored to win, but all those teams that lost this past weekend were favored to win too. Ole Miss, Bama, BYU, all that, right? And they lost. We've seen a lot of weird things in college football this year. So I don't think it's completely out of the question that Clemson gets into the playoffs, either as an ACC champion or as an at-large team, but they are on the outside looking in. Right now, I've got them at 13. Now, all of that hinges on the fact that they need to beat a red-hot South Carolina team this coming weekend. Clemson and South Carolina might be the 2 best teams that are kind of outside looking in at the playoffs right now. South Carolina's just been red-hot lately, and it gives me no pleasure to say that. I'm a known South Carolina hater, but they've had a good defense all year. Their front 4 has been amazing, and the quarterback has been playing better and better every single week over the last month or so, Lenore Sellers. They handled Wofford, Group of 5 elementary team, 56-12 this past weekend. And again, they get a chance to really prove it this week on the road at number 12, Clemson. That's going to be a great game. That's going to be one of the best games of the day. Rivalry weekend is filled with great games Friday and Saturday. Not many of them are going to be better than this one. This is going to be a great game. I'm excited about that one. Clemson hosting South Carolina. Ole Miss, I dropped down to 15. I went back and forth with Ole Miss and Bama. They have the same record, but they haven't played each other. So who do you rank ahead of the other? They both have wins over Georgia, so at home. So those are, they have the good win there. Alabama has losses to Vandy and Oklahoma. Ole Miss has losses to Florida and Kentucky. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not convinced I have those in the right order. I thought Ole Miss was, if I'm going just off the Georgia game, which is the big game they have in common that they won, Ole Miss to me was a more impressive team there than Alabama was. I know that those games were a while ago and they don't have anything to do with now. I couldn't figure out one way or the other, really. I guess they're 15A and 15B. If they played tomorrow, Alabama would beat them. I don't know. So anyway, I've got them at 15 and 16. It doesn't matter. Neither one of them are going to the playoffs. That we know. Ole Miss lost to Florida 24-17. They have the Egg Bowl this weekend against Mississippi State. Alabama, of course, got absolutely humiliated on the road at Oklahoma 24-3, failing to even score a touchdown. They have the Iron Bowl coming up this weekend. Auburn with a big win at home against Texas A&M last week. But I've got Ole Miss 15, Alabama 16. Tulane, I've got at 17. They're next in line. Should something happen to Boise State, I think Tulane is the team that would step in to the playoffs as the Group of Five representative. They won again. No, they're on a bye this week. They play Memphis. Memphis is not a terrible team. You see them, I've got them ranked 25th. The AP doesn't have them ranked, but I think they're in the others receiving votes category over on the AP poll. They beat Florida State early in the year, which I know is no great accomplishment, but they're a decent Group of Five team. If Tulane handles them, they're going to be breathing down Boise State's neck. If Boise State wins out, I think they're in, but Tulane is right there waiting if Boise State slips up. I've got Tulane at 17. Iowa State, I've got at 18. Iowa State's a pretty good team. They lost a couple of games. They probably wish they could get back. They won this past weekend against Utah 31-28, and they play Kansas State this coming weekend, a pretty good team. So that should be a good game too. I've got Iowa State at 18. At 19, I've got my hometown team, UNLV. They beat San Jose State 27-16. They host Nevada this coming week. UNLV lost to Boise earlier in the year. That's what's kind of holding them back right now, but they're a decent team. UNLV is. They beat San Jose State 27-16. They host Nevada. So in-state game there. 20, BYU. Wasn't sure what to do with them either. Started out 9-0, lost 2 games in a row, including this past weekend on the road at Arizona State, 28-23. They host Houston. Probably going to go 10-2. We'll see if they can make their way into the Big 12 title game. The Big 12 title game picture is a complete and total mess. There's about 11 different scenarios and possibilities involving 5 different teams, and trying to figure out what has to happen to get certain teams in will give you a headache. I can tell you this, Colorado has got the toughest road. They literally need about 7 or 8 things to happen in an exact way in order for them to get into the Big 12 title game. They're probably going to be the least likely to get in. Arizona State is probably the most likely to get in. We'll see how it shakes out this weekend, but I've got BYU there at 20 playing Houston this coming week. Illinois, I moved to 21. Had them at 25 last week, moved them up to 21. They won again. They beat Rutgers 38-31. They play on the road at Northwestern this coming week. Louisville, I've got at 22. Like I said, I don't think the AP's got them ranked. They're kind of an up and down type of team, but when they play well, they're a pretty good team. I've got them at 22. I've got Texas A&M at 23 after losing on the road to a bad Auburn team. Look ahead spot there for Texas A&M. Classic trap situation. Texas A&M goes into a difficult place to play at night, Auburn. No matter how good or bad Auburn is, that's a tough place to play when the crowd gets into the game, and they were juiced up for that one. And Texas A&M fell behind early, came back, tied it up, 4 overtime deal. But they end up losing on the road to Auburn. Must-win situation this weekend against Texas for Texas A&M. And like I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Texas, I don't know if I've been this excited to watch a game in a long time. This is going to be an unbelievable atmosphere and an unbelievable game, but I've got Texas A&M at 23. I've got Kansas State at 24 and Memphis at 25 to round out my top 25. Kansas State, believe it or not, still does have a chance to get into the Big 12 title game, but it involves BYU losing, Colorado losing, Arizona State losing. I think Iowa State losing. A bunch of teams have to lose. It's not likely to happen, but same thing for Colorado. But anyway, there it is, my top 25. Now, this is completely irrelevant. So before you get all mad and bent out of shape, which is probably too late, you probably already are. tomorrow, just like I've done every Tuesday for the last couple of weeks, I'll put out my playoff bracket. Save your anger for that. If you're going to get mad about something, it's past the point of the season where you need to be getting upset or mad about top 25 rankings. The playoff ranking is really what you should be focused on now in terms of your attention span or your anger level. So feel free down below to let me know, what you think I got wrong. Where would you move things around? How dumb am I for putting Georgia at 3? Get mad at me if you want to. I've been lower on Georgia all year than almost any other poll and ranking, but enough is enough. What Georgia has done this season with the schedule they've had, beating Texas, I've got them at 3. I really don't care how mad you get. Tomorrow I'll do the updated playoff rankings. But I do appreciate you watching, and have a good morning.